Father's house. There's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
Session 5 of The Father's House. By now we're probably picking up that this is all about God redeeming his creation, bringing people back into the Father's house. Over the next few days I want to look at a parable that we all know very well. To start with, we've probably sort of thought of this parable as 3 different parables with the same theme. But if we read carefully, Jesus first of all tells the parable of the lost sheep. And then he says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. So there's no telling another parable. Different picture in the same parable. And then he goes on, and Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. So really they're all part of the one parable. First of all, it's told in the context of Jesus being surrounded by people who were tax gatherers, sinners, and they were listening to what he was teaching. And the Pharisees were standing around and they were muttering, this man is mixing with sinners. Now remember that the people of Israel were called to be a holy nation, set apart. And the Jewish leaders took this to mean that, well, you never mix with people who are ungodly. And so they were very critical of Jesus doing that. In his answer to their mutterings, Jesus simply told these stories. First one's about a sheep and shepherd. Picture of sheep and shepherd is used throughout the Bible for God and his people. And just think of Psalm 23. But these Pharisees would have known their scriptures thoroughly, and so they would immediately pick up Jesus is talking about God and his people. They'd also know the passage from Ezekiel 34, where the prophet is speaking out against the leadership of Israel. Woe to you shepherds, he says. He points out that they've been terrible leaders, and because of this, the sheep have been scattered. Verse 6, they were scattered all over the earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Later in verse 11, for this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will search for my sheep and look after them. So Jesus starts to tell a story of a lost sheep, and I don't think the connection would have been lost on them. In Luke 15, he began saying, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Now he doesn't say, suppose a sheep chose to wander off. It's the shepherd who loses the sheep. Suggests perhaps he wasn't keeping very careful watch. But then the shepherd goes out looking, and he walks all over the desert until he finds it, and then he carries it home on his shoulder. Now I've never picked up a sheep, but I don't imagine that they are light. And this shepherd went to great effort to find the sheep, and then probably even a greater effort to carry it home. They held a party to celebrate. His reason for celebrating, he had found the lost sheep. It gave him great joy that he had found it. And so the parable says there's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous ones who do not repent. There's a hint here that the Pharisees should have taken. There is joy in bringing a sinner back into the fold. Jesus does acknowledge that the Pharisees are righteous, than the 99 righteous ones. But they needed to have the desire and the passion to bring the lost sheep home, to return them to the Father's house, because this is the desire of God. Get the lost sheep, bring them back home. It's the mission he gave Israel, and it's the mission he gives us.
We are his children, the thrill of his suffering, saved and redeemed by his blood. Called to be holy, a light to the nations, clothed with his power, filled with his love. Go forth in his name, proclaim afraid.